Welcome, friends, to a gathering place for the curious and the brave. Do you ever feel a shiver run down your spine on a perfectly ordinary day? Does the rustle of leaves in the wind sometimes whisper secrets in your ear? We delve into the realm of the unexplained. These are true stories, whispered through generations, passed down from campfire to campfire, each one abrush with the unseen. So settle in, adjust the lights, and prepare to be chilled. Tonight, we share true scary stories. This happened when I was in the second grade. I felt sick in the morning, but I still wanted to go to school that day. I managed the first period okay, but then I was sent home. I was running a very high fever. Luckily, we lived on the same street as the school, so instead of my parents having to come out of work and come pick me up, I could just walk straight home. It was fine to walk home alone for me. I didn't ever worry about it. It was only a short walk anyway. I let myself in and went straight to my bedroom. I climbed into bed and fell asleep. Before I knew it, I drifted away and was sleeping soundly. Some time later, though, I was awoken by a noise coming from downstairs. At first, I honestly thought it was my mom returning from her part-time job or whatever. Maybe the school had called her to tell her I was sick. Since she'd woken me up already, I figured I might as well go downstairs and greet her. I crept down the stairs quietly. I kinda felt like surprising her that day. I likely had a big smile on my face as I slowly went down the stairs. However, that smile instantly disappeared. I realized that my mom wasn't down there at all. It was someone else entirely. It was our neighbor, a man of 50 years. He lived next door, and we rarely interacted with him. I stopped and stared at him. He had a knife in his hand. Seeing me at home, he began to immediately panic. I'm old enough now to know that he probably didn't expect company. He would have assumed the house would have been empty, or I dread to believe this, but that my mom would have been home alone. Before I could even begin to process what I was seeing and begin to question what was happening, the man called out to me in a friendly voice. "Hey there, buddy. You can keep a secret, right? No one needs to know I was here, okay, pal?" My eyes were glued to the knife in his hand the whole time. While he was speaking to me, my brain was now kicking into gear. Remember, I had just woken up, and I had a big fever as well. My brain was beginning to put two and two together. Well, trying as best as I could, really. I was only a kid when this happened, after all. I stared at that knife as he brandished it toward me. I thought to myself, I'm in danger. I was so scared as the gravity of the situation set in. All I could do was nod yes. He smiled at me and lowered his knife as I nodded. Then, to my surprise, he turned around and left. I ran over to the door and locked it. I guess I must have forgotten to do so when I got home from school earlier. I wanted to tell my parents about this, but I thought my neighbor might kill me if I told them. He'd scared me so much with that knife he had in his hand that there was no way I could break the promise I had with him. I had to keep that promise no matter what, so I didn't say anything to my parents. About a month went by, and life was sort of returning to normal. I thought about that neighbor often, though, and I didn't like being home alone after school, waiting for my parents to come back. I was at least surviving, though. One afternoon after school, I heard a knock at the door. I went over, and it was the old man from next door. He had a load of sweets and said he wanted to give them to me. I was so stupid to open the door while I was home alone, especially after what happened. I know that now, but I reluctantly accepted them back then. I slammed the door on him. From then on, he would run into me often and come to the house about once a month. He would hand me candy and give me a big smile. "You're a good kid, huh? You go eat these." I didn't understand at the time why he was bringing me these sweets, but I guess it was to try and bribe my silence. I'm not really sure. I think that's what it was. I didn't like being rewarded for no reason. I didn't understand what was going on. I didn't like him giving that fake smile to me while holding his candy. But whenever I would think about telling my parents, I would always picture him holding that knife toward me. One time he happened to come over with his basket of candy while my mom was home. My mom made excuses for me, saying he's just shy, he doesn't want to come to the door, and stuff like that. I didn't want to talk to him or make eye contact. She didn't know the secret yet, the one I'd been keeping for him. Months and months went by when I heard the news that the creepy old neighbor of ours had passed away. It was like a weight had been lifted off of me. My parents thought I would be in absolute bits, because to them it looked like the old man and I had a deep connection. Inside I was celebrating though, not mourning. I didn't shed a single tear for that man. Life moved on after that. I grew up, moved away, and began a life of my own. I've always been a little edgy about being the only one at home though. Over the years, it's gotten a little bit easier. I went back to my hometown last weekend and was reminded of our neighbor though. I was at some neighborhood party with my parents when someone mentioned him. I listened in and heard the old guy loved betting on horses and playing slots. Another person chimed in. Yeah, I remember he was an alcoholic. Used to break into our home uninvited all the time. Had to have strong words with him once to get him to go away. Another neighbor chimed in as well. Hey, don't you think it's kind of funny that all the thefts in the neighborhood went away after he passed on? And that's when it dawned on me. He was there that day to rob us, and possibly do more than that. The man must have known my mother would usually have been home alone at that time, which was very likely because she worked a part-time job. If he had encountered her, I don't even want to think about what would have happened. That's the reason he was so intent on bribing me with sweets. I can still picture his face, even to this day. That knife in his hand being a pretty traumatic memory for me. This is something that happened a few years ago that really stressed me out. I'm a guy and was in my 20s and living home alone at the time. My next door neighbor was an older guy who was probably in his 40s. He was also living alone. On the night that this experience took place, I got home from work at about 11 p.m. As I was walking down the hall to my apartment, I suddenly heard a loud scream coming from my neighbors. That scream was undoubtedly a woman's scream. I stopped in place a little ways away and listened in for a while. It didn't sound like a scream of pain, though. It sounded like one of anger. I could hear muffled syllables of words, but couldn't make out what was being said. It sounded like the guy next door was having an argument. Well, he didn't seem to be doing all that much arguing himself. I didn't know he had a girlfriend, but he was a pretty serious kind of rigid guy. So I guessed if he did have one, I could see her arguing with him. Oh well, not my issue, I thought, as I walked into my apartment. While I was in my kitchen heating up my dinner, I heard the woman next door start laughing hysterically. At that point, I thought they must have made up with each other. She was certainly a very loud lady. Again, though, not my issue. I ate my dinner, and after a little while, I heard the woman shouting again. Only this time, it sounded like she'd pressed her body right up to the wall that joined my apartment to his. I was surprised when she said something very audible. Hello, I'm coming to see you soon. I found that very weird. I couldn't help but pay attention to this voice. I noticed that the old man also wasn't saying anything. It was really suspicious now. What the hell was going on next door? I stood still in my kitchen on edge. I had the feeling that something big was about to happen. And then, something did. There was a sudden knock on my door. I went and put my eye to the peephole and saw a woman I'd never met before, standing outside. I guess she must have heard me coming, because she spoke to me through my closed door. Hello, please, can I use your phone? The phone next door is broken. This was very unusual, but since I was friends with the man next door, I felt as if I shouldn't refuse. I mean, what if the quarrel they'd had escalated somehow? What if my neighbor had been hurt? I didn't want to take that risk, so against the uneasy feeling in my gut that I had about this woman, I opened the door. Immediately I regretted it. The woman began shouting at me. She was extremely worked up and seemed to be really anxious. She was shouting for help, saying something about being killed or killing someone. She wasn't making a great deal of sense. She had become so escalated that she was shouting out gibberish. She was so animated. I understood that she wanted to use my phone to call the police, so I showed her to my home phone. I told her to wait there, whilst I went to check on my neighbor. His door was open ajar. I'd never been in his apartment before, but I was shocked by what I saw inside. Everything had been turned over and thrown upside down. It looked like an absolute mess, clearly not the usual kind. It looked like there had been some sort of struggle next door. Had his fight with the woman in his apartment gotten physical? I called out my neighbor's name from the doorway, but no one responded. I decided that time was of the essence, so I entered his apartment. I looked in each room before him, but he was nowhere to be found. I heard a robotic kind of beeping noise and quickly realized what that noise meant. It was the noise a phone would make when not placed properly back on the receiver. I went over to his phone and placed it back on the hook. I then realized the woman, who was now alone in my apartment, had lied to me. I cursed myself for leaving her alone in there. I thought she must have been ransacking my apartment, just like she had done to my neighbor. I raced back and went straight in. I looked everywhere for that woman, ready to throw her out at a first glance, but I was shocked to realize she had already fled. Nothing in my apartment had been stolen, nor had anything been messed up. I guess she wasn't a thief after all. I decided to lock the door and not inform the cops. In my mind, it was clear that the neighbor and his girlfriend had had some sort of lover's quarrel, and I was way too tired to be filling out paperwork with the police that night. I just wanted to unwind. I got ready for bed after a little gaming, but for some reason, as I was lying down on my bed, I just couldn't bring myself to fall asleep. Whenever I would nod off, I would immediately wake myself up again. I knew tomorrow at work would be really rough due to the amount of times I was randomly waking up. Something just didn't quite feel right. At one point, I was staring blankly at the ceiling when I sensed something. I had that horrible feeling, the feeling of being watched. I turned my head to the left, and my eyes were drawn to the closet. I hadn't thought to check there earlier. I tried to focus my vision and noticed the door was slightly ajar. I jumped out of bed instantly. As I looked closer, I came eye to eye with someone hiding in there. There were eyes peering out of my closet door. I wondered if our eyes met for a split second. From the darkness of my closet, I heard a dark chuckle, forming into a laughing cackle. It was the woman from before. She hid in my closet. She hadn't left at all. I launched myself to my feet, unashamedly screaming as I did. I ran out of my apartment only wearing a t-shirt and some shorts. I ran and hid in a laundromat. When the sun came up, I returned to my apartment. I planned to call the police when I got in, but when I climbed the steps to my floor, I noticed they were already there. Apparently, my neighbor was the one who'd called them. I told him about the strange events of that night and said that my place hadn't been robbed at all. He didn't say much, just seemed to look somewhat apologetic. My neighbor came around later that afternoon with a gift certificate and a big apology. He didn't tell me who the woman was or why she'd done the thing she did. I ended up feeling so awkward about it, I couldn't bring myself to ask more questions. I still live next door to that guy, and there hasn't been another incident like that one. Well, as far as I know. By the way, my apartment had been ransacked the second time I came back in the morning. Things were all in disarray, but nothing had been stolen at all. It was just a complete mess. The one odd thing, though, was that for some reason, just like my neighbor, my phone had been left off the hook. This story is from 2017, when I was a freshman in high school and bored in class one day. I was in my third period, and I was happy I would be getting out of class later. I had an orthodontics appointment to get my braces adjusted, and my mom would be coming to the school to pick me up. The class I was in was math, and it was quite boring to me. To be honest, I was just not really a math guy. In high school, I would usually just sit and look out the window, not paying very good attention. I sat in the back corner of the classroom, which was on the second floor of the school. That's what I was doing on this day, just looking out the window. The teacher was talking about math, and I was distracted, looking out the window to the front parking lot below me. I was hoping that time would pass, and I would soon be able to leave. My mom would be there to pick me up, and I wouldn't have to notice all this anymore. As I was looking out the window, though, I noticed several police cars driving down the street. They ended up turning into the front school parking lot. I thought that was a little bit strange. Me looking at this was interrupted when the classroom door opened. It was a student with a pass, and I knew it was for me. The teacher paused, took the pass, and then called my name. I got up from my desk, packed up my things, and headed for the front of the class. I took the pass, and the teacher gave me my homework assignment for the day, which I then shoved into my backpack. I left the classroom and headed down the hallway. As I started walking, I got a text from my mom and saw she was there at the side door. That's where you would get picked up from. It happened to be at the opposite end of the school, though. As I walked the empty hallways, suddenly I heard a sound come over the school intercom. I wondered what it could be. Immediately I had a bad feeling. This was all out of the ordinary. What followed was a message saying we were going into lockdown. I was still a ways from the side doors, but I really wanted to get there before I would have to stay in school. I didn't want to have to wait in a lockdown classroom and miss my orthodontics appointment. It wasn't really the appointment I cared about. If I went with my mom, I would be able to take the rest of the day off from school. Plus, I was a little bit worried about why we were going into lockdown in the first place. If it was a danger being in the school, obviously I wanted to get out of there, and fast. I sped up my walking pace as I kept going down the halls. I hadn't seen anybody since I'd left my classroom. I was hoping I wouldn't either. If a teacher saw me, they would likely make me go into their classroom. When I was about halfway to the side doors, but still upstairs, I heard the sound of somebody walking down an upcoming hallway. I didn't have to go down that hallway myself, but I had to go down one that would intersect with that one. I did not know who this was. I chose to try and avoid them. I stopped still a ways back from the corner and kind of hid behind some lockers. The footsteps got closer and closer, and I decided to move and start going in the other direction. When I started walking, though, the footsteps suddenly started going along a lot faster. I ran to the nearest corner and slipped around it. I didn't think whoever it was would chase me, but they did. I heard them still coming closer. I literally ran for the stairs and flew down them. Now I was thinking there was no way the person behind me would continue following me, but they still did. I wasn't sure who this was, but I was in real deep now. It was clear they were chasing me. I turned at the first possible place I could and went down another hallway. It was very long and straight. There was complete silence other than my footsteps and the ones behind me. I ran to get to the end of the hall, and I heard the person behind me reach the bottom of the stairs. They then started running down the hallway after me. When I got to the end, the only thing I had to do was go around the corner, then make one more turn to the side exit. As I looked back before turning the corner, I saw a random man with long, stringy black hair covering his entire face. He was wearing a black leather jacket. I had no idea who this guy was. I got even more creeped out when I saw him. I initially thought this must have been a teacher, but this was no one I knew. I turned and sprinted away. I ran all the way to the side doors as fast as I could. When I got there, I burst out of them and ran for my mom's car. I was able to make it there and get inside. I told my mom we were in a lockdown and some guy was chasing me around the school. She called the school and reported it. As we left, we saw the several police cars out front. I remembered seeing them enter the school grounds. It had to be connected. We went to my orthodontics appointment after that, but by the end of the day, I learned more details. Apparently, the man from the school was fleeing from the police. They tried to pull him over earlier, and he led cops on a big chase. After his car got stuck in a ditch, he got out and fled on foot. He ran for a while and was able to momentarily get away until he was spotted on school campus. Nobody thought he would actually go inside the school. The cops were mainly searching the area around it. Eventually, they did send some officers inside, and he was located in a hallway. Nobody was harmed, thankfully. I don't think anybody knew about him chasing me around, though. I'm glad I got away from that guy. Not sure why he was after me. I don't know if he was dangerous or what, but that's my scariest experience from high school. I'm currently a high school history teacher. This is something that happened a few years ago. It was a normal school day, and I had just finished teaching a class. It was going into the third period for the day. During this hour, I did not have a class to teach. Each teacher in the department would get 1 hour where they didn't have a class. It was different for every teacher, though. Usually, I would use this spare hour to grade assignments and prepare lessons. On this day, when class ended and the next period started, I left my classroom. I was headed to the teacher's lounge to make some coffee. Then I would go back. Each department had their own teacher's lounge. The history department at school had 5 of us, so when I got to the room, it was empty. It was just a little ways down the hall, and was between one hallway and another. It was sort of a weird room. It had 2 windows in it that looked out to nothing but the hallways. We had curtains inside as well, that were always closed so nobody could see in. I'm not really sure why those windows were even in that room in the first place. Nevertheless, inside the lounge were a few couches, a table, some chairs, a fridge, a TV. It was basically a break room. The floors were also carpeted, and it was very comfortable in there. I took my time making my coffee, because I didn't really have that much work to do. As I was in there, though, I heard over the school speakers that we were going into a lockdown. I was really surprised. In all my time being a teacher there, I had never seen a real lockdown. Sure, we'd had several drills, but never a real one. I was wondering what the reason was. Up to that point, it had seemed like a perfectly normal school day. I decided to go to the doorway and open it up. If there were any kids in the hallway, I would make sure they got to safety. When I looked out, I didn't see anyone. It was eerily quiet. I went back into the lounge and prepared my coffee. I was going to head back to my classroom and lock it up, but when I arrived at the doorway to leave, I looked out the window into the hallway. I actually saw someone there. It wasn't a student or a teacher. It was a man who was on the younger side, but he was way too old to be a high school student, probably in his mid-20s. He was walking in my direction. I decided to take shelter in the teacher's lounge. My instincts were telling me this guy was bad news. After I got inside, I locked the door to the lounge. Seconds later, somebody tried yanking it open. It was obviously that guy I'd just seen. I was really surprised he'd tried going inside this room. Why would he want to go into the teacher's lounge? The strangest part was when the guy then knocked on the door. Well, obviously I was not going to answer that. That was when I heard him speaking on the other side. Let me in. It was a demand. Well, I was not going to let him in. I didn't answer. Instead, I got my phone out and called the principal. I asked him specifically why we were in a lockdown and wanted to know who this guy was. The guy already knew I was in there, so I didn't bother staying quiet. I called out to him and demanded to know who he was. He didn't answer me, just demanded I let him in again. When I called the principal, he didn't pick up the phone. I waited a minute or so and called again. Meanwhile, the guy who just tried to get in didn't knock or say anything. I thought maybe he had left. At least, that's what I was hoping. I tried to call the principal again. As I was dialing, I heard the sound of glass shattering. I looked over and saw that one of the windows to the break room was being broken open with some kind of blunt object. The curtains were still closed, so I couldn't see to the other side very well. Soon the entire window had been smashed in. I stood there kind of in shock. I saw the man who had been in the hallway suddenly start to climb through the window and into the room. As he was doing that, I sprinted to the door. When I got to it, I opened it and ran out, and kept running until I made it back to my classroom. When I got there, I slammed the door behind me and locked it. I did all of this without looking back once. Luckily for me, I didn't see that guy anywhere on my way there. I finally felt safe, now that I was back in my classroom. This obviously suspicious guy was still inside the school, though. I called police on my phone and was told they were aware of the lockdown situation at the school. Officers were already on the way. After that, I didn't hear or see anything else. I waited inside my classroom, and the lockdown finally ended 20 minutes later. The guy was caught by police. When they found him, he was still inside the teacher's lounge. He had snuck in somehow and was on drugs apparently. Aside from that, I don't really know many other details. I can't say for sure what his intentions were, but I'm really glad I managed to get away from him. I used to work for a security company in Sendai. It was a pretty good job if I'm being honest. The day rate was not to be sniffed at. It was pretty perfect for what I needed at the time. I liked the job, but if I'm sharing my story here with you, you know that it's not going to be all smooth sailing. I want to tell you about the incident that made me decide to quit this near-perfect job. About a year on my security company's books, I was given more and more work. Some jobs were really great, but some I didn't like so much. My last assignment was the one that made me quit. It was a road construction job. The construction company had site offices that I had to patrol. Basically just had to go up and down a stretch of the highway. As I drove to meet my colleagues and take over for the night shift, I was told by one of the security guards that he'd really had enough of working there and didn't want to come back for any amount of money. At the time, I just thought to myself, wow, something must be going on. He mentioned something about it being haunted. I was like, oh, okay, fine. I wasn't all that worried. I clocked in, not paying what he said much mind. Later that night, or maybe I should say that morning, it was about 4 a.m. or so, when I heard a voice start coming through the radio. It wasn't a ghost or anything weird, though. It was just one of the guys who worked for our security firm on the night shift with me. Hey Ken, I'm seeing someone. Ah, geez, I really hope you can see this, man, because otherwise I think I'm losing it. There's someone standing on the surface of the lake directly in the middle. Verification, please. Over. There was a light that was nearby the construction workers' offices, so I looked in that direction. I'm not really a lover of pranks if I'm being honest, so I was expecting to be irritated by whatever he was trying to spring on me, but I looked over nonetheless. It was my job. I don't see anything, man, I replied through my radio. I'm telling you, there's a person out on the lake and they're walking towards you. Over. Coming my way. Had this guy lost his mind? He came rushing over to where I was, absolutely shaken to his core. I didn't see anything myself, but clearly this guy really thought he did. It had him really worked up. I've seen people frightened before, but this was a whole new level of fear on his face. It made me want to leave my post. So we all did for a brief period. We called the other security guard to see if he had heard or seen anything, and we all met up. The security guard said he had seen a woman wearing white clothes earlier that night by the lake. I later found out this location was famously home to some spirit. I looked it up online. I don't know if that's what my friend saw, but legend says that a woman was staying in a hotel nearby, and her life had been taken very violently. Her remains were chained to cinder blocks and cast to the bottom of the lake. They called her the Lady of the Lake. Like I said, I didn't see her myself, but I didn't want to see her really either. Honestly, I didn't want to see anything that could make a grown man be as scared as my colleague was that night. So that's why I ended up quitting. Some things really just open your eyes. A long time ago, I had a job at my local convenience store. It was only a part-time gig, and I was grateful for the money it brought in. I was new to work at that age. One thing I wasn't so keen on was the fact I had to work the night shift. It wasn't my very first job. I don't want you to think that. I was young, but not that young. I was about 20 at the time. I'm a guy, if that matters at all. This incident happened one night, during one of the colder months while I was cleaning. It was sometime after 3 a.m. I know that because that was the time I had to empty out the old containers and clean them. These containers were usually pretty oily by the time you had to empty them out. You really had to put some elbow grease into cleaning them. It wasn't a 5-minute job. I knew I would be in the back of the store for a while. The convenience store policy was to clean these out when it was quiet, which was about 3 a.m. for me. I was in the back carefully washing them out, making sure not to splash myself with any of that stinking oil. At that point, I thought I heard someone come into the store. I naturally shouted out, "Welcome!" I turned to face the door. I was facing the sink at the time, so I was kind of surprised when I turned around and saw that no one was there. I didn't overthink it though. Sometimes these things can happen. I just put it down to the fact I must have been half asleep or something. I went back to washing up the containers. I kept scrubbing for a while, but then I noticed something out of the corner of my eye. I looked up through this window we had in the back and saw a woman with long black hair standing by the magazine rack. I guess someone really did come in. Now I was aware of her, and I would react should she approach the counter. More often than not, though, people who headed right for the magazine rack were just there to browse, at least in my experience. I finished cleaning all the stuff and set it out to dry. I figured I might as well set out some water, in case she wanted to have a cup of ramen or something else. I hung out in the back, busying myself as much as I could, but she didn't show any signs of coming to the register. I stuck my head out from the back and looked for the black-haired customer who'd entered the store, but she was suddenly gone. There was no one there but me. I said to myself, okay, that's weird. I decided it would be a good idea to look for her. Just make sure she hadn't collapsed or something. I went down the aisles, but she was nowhere to be seen. I even gave the ladies' door a knock and asked if she was all right. The sign was showing it as vacant. I opened the door and looked in and saw there was no one there. I thought, okay, whatever. I started back toward the register. I must have been more tired than I'd realized. As I looked up, though, I saw the woman with the black hair standing in the back just behind the window. I froze. I had just done a sweep of the entire store. I had checked all the places she could have been. For her to be back there without me knowing seemed like an absolute impossibility. I panicked. Impossible. That word just kept coming back to me. I ran to the first safe place I could think of, which was our warehouse store area. It was good that I did, because in our storage area there were these surveillance cameras which covered all angles of the store. I stared at the 4 camera angle feeds for the longest time, but couldn't find any sign of the woman. I knew that she was somewhere in the store though. I couldn't trick myself into doubting what my eyes had clearly seen. I couldn't do anything about the situation I was in. Those very same eyes that had seen that woman were now telling me the store was entirely empty. I timidly returned. I still had the rest of my job to do. I wasn't going back there empty-handed though. I carried a mop with me, at the ready. Yeah, sounds a little lame. I didn't want to use it as a weapon, and I had no intentions of hurting anyone that night. I just didn't want to be without something to defend myself. If it was a customer and I was just overreacting, then I could just say I had a perfectly friendly mop to mop up the store with. I made it back to the cash register. It was somewhat comforting to have the barrier of the counter between me and whatever might be here. I realized quickly that I needed to occupy my mind, so I began to count the bills in the register. When I got bored of that, I went over to the magazine corner and decided to borrow a magazine, a men's magazine. Reading that made me feel a little better if I'm being honest. I calmed myself down a little. I was engrossed in my gentleman's reading when I heard a truck approaching. It was the garbage truck. I quickly went out to the back to grab all the rubbish we had. Then I returned to the front of the store. For the second time that night, I froze in place. I saw someone's feet in front of me, but they were head height. I couldn't help but stare at these feet that seemed to be suspended in the air before my eyes. The ankles were facing me. I slowly looked upward toward the dangling feet, belonging to the woman with black hair. She was softly swaying left and right. She had something around her neck that extended to the ceiling. In a matter of seconds, I understood the situation. I saw a woman suspended from a rope by her neck. My eyes showed me her pale face, and her eyes gave me a bloodshot glare. She wasn't there. She couldn't be there. Yet there she was. My work had turned into a freaking haunted house. I ran for it. I ran out screaming. I only stopped screaming because I was aware of the fact I was. Worse than the screaming, though, was the fact I couldn't control my arms at all. They were just uncontrollably shaking. I pulled my phone out of my pocket and made what I knew would be a very embarrassing call to the police. I was out of options. I knew that what I would be about to tell them would be completely unbelievable, but I didn't know what else to do. A couple of officers arrived, and I spoke with them outside. I was not going back in there alone. They initially had looks of doubt and concern on their faces. As I explained the situation, they went into the store and looked all over the place while I waited outside. I was pacing up and down. I peered in when I thought they weren't looking my way. The 2 officers had a conversation that I couldn't hear, and then one of them came back outside to speak with me. "Hey kid, are you sure you didn't imagine it? Maybe working alone reminded you of a horror film or something like that?" He gave me a smile. "Yep, that's it, isn't it?" It was as if saying that was some kind of case-closed moment for them. To be honest, I didn't argue at all. I didn't think anyone else would ever see what I saw. I didn't like the way they spoke to me, so I was glad to see the back of them while they left. I didn't mind that at all. I made sure I stood by the door for the remainder of my shift, just in case anything else strange were to happen. I was going to make sure I could get out of that door as soon as possible. I got through the rest of the night without seeing anything else strange. When I saw my manager next, I told him I didn't want to work the night shift anymore. Thankfully, I got a switch to an earlier shift, and that was my last night shift in that convenience store. It's something I could never do again after seeing what I saw. Just the image of seeing that woman suspended in the center of the store gives me chills. I dreaded work, but I needed the money. My town was not known for the opportunities it gave our youth. I couldn't stop thinking about what I'd seen. and eventually realized I wanted to find out more. I looked into the building's history, and when that came back with nothing, I looked into other buildings that had been built on that plot of land before. It wasn't long before I discovered that a block of apartments had stood there before the convenience store did. I looked up the address and found an incident of a woman taking their own life. I know I saw something that night. I saw the woman who ended it all. I don't know what to think. I know I saw something there. There were times after that night, even on the morning shift, that I thought I caught a glimpse of that woman through the window when I was in the back. I had to leave that job eventually, and I'm glad I did. I hope that if that woman's ghost really is there, her spirit can find peace one day and rest before I ever see her again. I used to work at a movie theater for a few months when I was younger. This was years ago now, but I sometimes still think about the crazy experiences I had. My coworkers were fun and interesting, but even more so were the customers. Our theater would get pretty busy sometimes. Most of the people were very nice, but one time I had an experience that was truly a horror story. I was working an evening shift. I don't remember exactly what time I started or got off. It was probably something like 4 to 10. Everything was going fine until around 8 p.m. or so. Things were kind of busy, and there were a decent number of people standing around in a big line. It had formed at the concession stand where I was working. Usually we had 2 lines when things were busy, and that's what we had on this night as well. I was at one line and my coworker Amanda was at the other. I served a few people when a guy got to the front of my line. He was a bigger dude with short blonde hair and glasses. Asked for a large popcorn and a water cup. I told him the price, and when I did, he didn't believe me. Now, most people know that movie theater food is overpriced. I don't like it, but it's not exactly my choice either. There's a lot of people that try to sneak food into the movie theaters as well. When I worked there, I saw multiple times people bringing stuff in that they were not supposed to. But it's not like I was going to stop them or anything. It just is what it is. Well, this guy objected to the price greatly. He told me there was no way popcorn should cost that much. I was already scooping it up and filling the bucket for the guy. I said back to him that I knew the price was a lot, but that's just kinda how things were. At first, I thought he might have been joking or complaining for the sake of it. Then he said he was not paying. I finished getting his popcorn and put it down on the counter. "So, you don't want this anymore?" The guy told me to give it to him, but he wasn't going to pay for it. Surely he must have been joking, but apparently he was dead serious. I laughed a little bit and saw the guy did not have a joking look on his face at all. In fact, he seemed to be getting angrier and angrier. I told him the smaller sizes were obviously cheaper if he wanted that. He looked up at the sign and read them, then yelled at me that they were all a scam. There was a line forming of people behind him that were all waiting for their items. He continued to look at the menu and said everything on it was a scam. He started reading the prices of everything out loud. And the more he read, the louder his voice became. Some of the other people standing around started to take notice. The guy then raised his hands as if to make an announcement and yelled that we were the biggest scam ever. Some people started to laugh, and others looked like they just wanted him to stop. I told the guy if he didn't want his damn popcorn, then he should just leave, because a lot of people were being held up behind him. He reached forward and snatched it, then threw it right in my face. A bunch of popcorn went flying past my head, and some of it hit me as well. I couldn't believe he'd just done that. The man then sprayed the remaining popcorn around, throwing it at a bunch of people standing around him. He then poured the rest over his own head, as to give himself a shower. He then slammed the container on the ground and rushed over to a little stand holding bags of chips. He knocked them over and finally walked off down the hallway toward the theaters. Everyone was just standing there stunned. A few people laughed, and then some guy came over and picked up all the chips off the ground. Everything resumed back to normal. Another employee came over and started to sweep. I didn't see the guy for the rest of the night. I think I got off before whatever movie he was at finished. Looking back sometimes, I think I should have just given it to him for free to avoid all the trouble, but I do not regret doing it. The man was a jerk and looked like he was absolutely about to go off his rocker. He certainly didn't deserve anything for free. That's my biggest movie theater horror story. A few years ago, I went to the movie theater to see Uncharted with my friend. I don't remember why, but we drove separately to the movie. We met each other there and went inside. The movie theater was probably less than 10 minutes away from where I lived, in an area of town with some other stores around. It was the most popular movie theater in the city. I arrived that night and met up with my friend for the movie. It was pretty busy. We watched the movie and had a lot of fun, and when it was over, we left. My friend and I said our goodbyes to each other, and then went our separate ways. He was parked on the other side of the parking lot, which was pretty busy. I was parked kind of in the back area. I walked to my vehicle, and when I got to it, I saw there was a car parked right next to me, with the engine still running. It was an SUV. I walked around it towards my driver's door, when out of nowhere, a guy popped up from around the corner of the SUV. He blocked my way of getting to my car. He looked to be pretty young, about 19 or 20. The way he approached me out of nowhere really took me by surprise. He walked over aggressively. When he got right up within a couple feet of me, he said his car was having some problems and pointed to the SUV parked right next to me. He asked me if I could help him. I told him I didn't know anything about cars and pointed out that it seemed to have a perfectly running engine. I didn't know what the problem could even be. The guy said he didn't know what was wrong either and asked me desperately for my help. Honestly, this really seemed suspicious. As he was talking to me, I looked next to me at my car. Through the window, I could see somebody on the other side. They were crouched down, hiding right up against my vehicle. I was really weirded out by this. The guy was kind of in front of his car now. I took out the keys to my car and put it in the keyhole at my driver's door. I was afraid to hit the unlock button because the guy at my car would probably get inside of it as well. I unlocked it manually as fast as possible. As I did, I jumped inside and locked the door behind me. The guy that had been in front of the SUV came over and went right up to my window. Meanwhile, the other guy backed off a bit and kind of went behind my vehicle now. I started trying to back up. Both guys continued to encircle me, and the man at my front window knocked on it. I ignored them, though, and kept backing out. The other guy had no choice but to move away from my vehicle. I drove away and went home after that. I feel like I escaped some sort of setup. I don't know exactly what those guys were doing, but it very clearly was not anything good. My hometown is in Iwanai, Hokkaido, which is about a 2-hour drive from Sapporo. There's a river along the coast called the Nezuka River, which is where my experience took place. The area I grew up in wasn't exactly bustling with life and activity. It was basically just full of fishermen, their homes, and seafood processing plants. I had a bunch of good friends at the time, and we always tried to find ways to have fun. We had a band and used to have this practice room, which was loaned to us. No one used it at night, and it wasn't close enough to any houses for anyone to complain about the noise. It was actually a part of one of those processing plants I mentioned. It wasn't the easiest to access, but it was perfect for us. The smell wasn't great, sure, but we didn't really care about that. This happened on a night where 4 of us friends and band members got together for some band practice. We had been playing a few songs and having a good time. At some point, though, the practice room was getting so hot that I decided to go and get something to drink. It turned out everyone else wanted something to drink as well, so we did rock, paper, scissors to determine who would have to go. I ended up losing, obviously, and so did my other friend who played the drums. We'll call them D. Off we went to go and get drinks. There was a small store near the Nezuka River, but it closed at about 8 p.m. It was well beyond 8 p.m. now. I think it was about midnight or so. We usually hung out there until quite late at night. We were all in our teens, and being in the band was a whole lot of fun. Even though the store was shut, we knew there were some vending machines right outside of it. That's where we decided to go. In order to get to the area we were seeking, we had to cross the bridge over the Nezuka River. For some reason, as we were going over the bridge, I decided to take a look underneath it. I was surprised when I saw someone under there. I didn't really expect to see someone down there that late at night. I thought it could be someone doing a spot of night fishing or something. We bought our drinks from the vending machine and turned back to cross the bridge. One of those late-night long-distance trucks happened to go over at the same time we did, and its headlights illuminated the area. I could now see the man under the bridge a lot more clearly. He was obviously not fishing. To me, it looked like he was digging a hole of some sort. As a prank, me and my friend threw some stones in the water to get his attention. Just see his reaction. I don't know why we were being stupid like that. The man went completely nuts and started shouting at us. We ran back to join our friends in the practice room. All the while we were running, the man was yelling all these bizarre threats. We told our friends all about it. They didn't seem interested, though. A few days went by and we were practicing again at the processing plant. We were there almost every day. One day we saw a bit of commotion going down by the river. We were a countryside community, so when people gather and clamor about like that, you think, oh man, there has to have been a fire or something. It was cause for concern is what I mean. We went over to the people gathered by the bridge, and I asked an older lady what was going on. She said that a body had been discovered, buried underneath it. My friend D and I looked at each other, and back to our bandmates. Even though none of us said a word, we all understood at the same time. What me and D had seen that night, when we went to go get drinks, was the killer burying the body. We made sure we reported what we saw to the police. I don't think they needed much assistance, though. We saw a news report the very next day that they'd already caught the guy, and he confessed to everything. The news report said the man had apparently murdered a woman, and after killing her, placed her body in a trunk. He then drove to that area and buried the body on the riverbank. Hokkaido police searched the Nezuka River as per his statement and found a body. The suspect was detained for murder and abandonment of a corpse. After that, we didn't like to stay out too late by that river, or even in the band practice spot. We preferred to hang out in areas where there were a lot more people around, shopping malls and the like. After a while, 3 of us got jobs in Sapporo, whereas D stayed in the local area and got a job there. We're all still in touch, and it seems like the bridge has become some sort of a tourist spot or something. He says people show up there ghost hunting and to test their courage. I don't want to go back to that bridge if I'm being honest. I pray for the soul of that woman who was buried there, and I hope there's no ghost at all. It was a really traumatic event, and one I don't think I'll ever forget. Uncle Owen was always a bit of a weird guy, but we loved him as kids. He lived out in the woods in a cabin that he'd supposedly built all on his own. When we were younger, we always loved going out there because it was a much different experience than living in town. It was so quiet, except the sounds of animals and bugs in the forest. Those could actually get surprisingly loud. During the day, it was fun to play outside in the woods, but at night it could get really creepy. Uncle Owen would also tell us these ghost stories, and as kids, those sorts of things really scared the hell out of us. No one ever really minded, though. It was actually a ton of fun. When I was 10 years old, I remember being at the cabin with several other cousins of mine. It was a regular summer day, and we had spent the day playing outside. Our families would sit and talk after dinner, and that was generally when Uncle Owen would begin telling one of his scary stories to the group. They always, not surprisingly, took place out in the woods, in an area similar to where he lived. They were long and rambling stories that you could never expect to be over really soon. We didn't care, though, because he was such a good storyteller. Anyone could just sit there and listen to him talk for a long time. This night it was very windy outside. It had been like that throughout the entire day, but it seemed to get much worse at nighttime. We could hear the wind's gusts howling outside, which gave even more of a scary element to the story he was telling. The funny thing is that although this was the most important storytelling that I remember, I don't really remember anything of what the story was actually about. What I do remember is the howling of the wind and Uncle Owen stopping the story several times as if he was listening to something that was happening outside. The older boys were sure that he kept listening because he was trying to add some scary element to the story he was telling, but he shushed them every time they piped up about it. He seemed sure that he was hearing something outside and figured after a while that maybe his shed door was open. The wind might have been blowing the door open and closed, causing these strange banging noises. Uncle Owen said he was going to go and make sure the door was actually closed. Said it would be terrible to try and fix the door if it got blown off its hinges. He told us to sit tight, and he would be right back and finish telling his story. Well, the older boys were at it again. As Uncle Owen left, they began telling us he was just messing with us all. Uncle Owen would surely come back to the house and try to find a way to scare us. The only adults there were my mom and aunt, and they knew we liked the scary stories, so they didn't do anything to try and shut the boys up. We all waited in anticipation for the inevitable scare that would come when Uncle Owen came back in. The only problem was that moment didn't come. We waited and waited, and thought that Uncle Owen must be trying to ratchet up the suspense. After a while of him not coming back, though, my mom and aunt began to get very concerned. The older boys, 115 and 116, decided to go out and see where he was. Perhaps the door really had broken, and he was out there trying to fix it. After a while, the boys came back, though, and they were no longer joking around. They told my aunt and mom that he was nowhere to be found. The shed door was open but not broken, so they closed and secured it. They looked around everywhere, expecting him to jump out and scare them, but he never did. There was no trace of him anywhere. My aunt went out with the boys and grabbed Owen's shotgun to take with them. They were out there for a while, but when they came back there was no further news, no trace of him at all. They had called out for him and received no answer. They looked all around the property and found no trace of him at all. I wish this story had a happy ending, or at the very least a resolution, but I can't give you either of those. Uncle Owen just disappeared on that windy night as he went outside in the middle of telling a ghost story. He was never found. A body was never found. Nothing was ever found. I remember that Uncle Owen did have some enemies out there, and some people think he was killed by them for owing money or something like that. I don't remember all of the rumors. All I remember is missing him dearly and never finding out what happened on that windy night.
Don't forget to hit that subscribe button and that little notification bell so you never miss a story. And if you have your own encounter you'd like to share, leave a comment below. Who knows, it might just find its way into a future video. Until next time, stay safe, stay curious, and remember, the scariest stories are often the ones closest to home.